Was Chet Atkins the greatest guitar player of all time? Let's just start this right out of the box by saying greatest of all time is so subjective, especially when it comes to art and music. But even in things like professional sports, say the NBA, you've got all these statistics. You got points, assists, blocks, rebounds, turnovers, you got games won, you have championships won, and still people can't agree over who is the greatest of all time, although it is certainly a discussion had by many. So when it comes to greatness overall, there's a couple of different factors that determine the greatness of a guitar player. One that's kind of obvious is technical ability. How can you play? How fast can you play? How many chords, scales? How much knowledge do you have of the guitar? That certainly is a factor. You also have notoriety and influence in the time period that you are in. That, as a factor, is highly dependent on who came before you. How did you innovate? How did you influence? And what came after you? And who pays homage to you? Perhaps awards. And of course, we know that not all great musicians got the awards that they should have, but it is a factor. Another factor is diversity of styles, the ability to play a lot of different styles well and to do them justice. And I'd say kind of the last main factor is overall pleasure of listening to the musician. Can they take that technical ability and turn it into something that people really enjoy listening to? And that has to do with tone, their choices of notes and songs. And so I believe that Chet Atkins had all four. He had technical ability, he had the influence over his generation, he had a diversity of styles, and he was very pleasing to the ear. So, born in 1924, Chet Atkins came into a period where when he kind of cut his teeth in the music industry, he was actually playing live music for the radio, which was kind of the way of the times. Instead of spinning records, they would have live musicians come in and play music. So Chet Atkins was certainly in an era that was very transitional. He became a recording artist, recording albums of his own. He was the artist and repertoire manager for RCA Victor Records, and he produced albums for so many different artists that we know and love today, from Elvis to the Everly Brothers and countless others. But he also had over 100 albums of his own, either solo or with duets with other people. And that's where I'd kind of suggest, if you're not a Chet Atkins fan already, I'd really dive into some of those duets. Now, some of my favorites of the duets would be like his albums with Les Paul, like Guitar Monsters, with Jerry Reed. The two albums, Me and Chet, Me and Jerry, are phenomenal. And one that had a profound influence on the way that I play guitar, which is The Day the Fingerpickers Took Over the World, with Tommy Emmanuel. So Chet Atkins, when it came to technical ability, he kind of pioneered a style of thumb and three fingers. One of his big influences, Merle Travis, played with the thumb and one finger. Kind of that style. But Chet Atkins didn't have access to YouTube and didn't see Merle Travis live during the time that he was developing his style. So he just used a thumb and three or sometimes four fingers to do many of his classic riffs. Kind of a banjo style there. But of course, he also had his thumb picking style, which was pioneered by Merle Travis and others. But he kind of took it a step further. Chet Atkins' technical ability wasn't only limited to fingerpicking. In the classical realm of fingerpicking, he could do some incredible classical music and could have just been a classical guitar player himself, and I believe would have been very successful at it. If you want an example of just how good of a classical player he is, I'd recommend what's available on YouTube. You can see him playing Recuerdas de la Alhambra, which was written by Francisco Tárrega. He did it with an orchestra, which involves a very difficult, I believe it's called tremolo technique. Not only that, he had some amazing jazz chops as well, which really developed his chord knowledge. And he would listen to jazz guitar players and piano players and horn players in the radio studio that he worked at and the recording studio that he worked at. And he brought together those classical and jazz influences over to, I guess, country guitar. And Chet Atkins is kind of considered a country guitar player. And certainly so many country guitarists, you know, Brad Paisley, Vince Gill, Steve Wariner, Clint Black, so many of these guitar players pay homage to Chet Atkins. But he really, to me, is not just a country guitar player. He's not your typical twang guitar player, for instance. He had a class and a finesse that really set him apart. So when it comes to the influence over the time, there was a time, especially in the 50s and 60s, where Chet Atkins had really solidified himself as a recording artist. He had some early hits like Country Gentleman. And that one, they actually sent out handwritten notes to radio DJs all over the country and got a lot of airplay from. One of his other hits is Yakety Yaks. Now I'm playing little hacky versions of his stuff. He of course did it a lot more beautifully and with a lot more finesse. And so, kind of like I already covered, his diversity of styles you can hear all over his records, which lasted from the late 40s all the way up until pretty much when he died in 2001. And he continued to build and develop, and technically he remained amazing as a guitar player, but also just got into so many different styles. He kept with the times, influenced guitar players not just in the country realm, but a ton of jazz players listened to Chet Atkins, so many rock and roll guitar players, you know, even George Harrison of the Beatles. A lot of these guitar players, which don't necessarily play in the Chet Atkins style, they pay homage to him. And so he had that influence over guitar players to this day, and also won numerous accolades. He was nominated for multiple Grammys. He actually, one of the Grammys that he was nominated for, and he might have won, I can't recall, was arranged by John Knowles, and it was a Joplin tune, The Entertainer. And I actually got to meet John Knowles and play with him, so shout out to John Knowles for arranging that. And Chet Atkins just worked with so many musicians well. He was known to be fast in the studio at getting good takes, staying on budget, staying on time, and as a recording artist is one of the most prolific that there is. He won numerous awards for Best Instrumentalist, Best Guitar Player, Best Musician, some Lifetime Achievement Awards and things of that sort. So he certainly had influence, he had the accolades, and he was born in a time where he could influence so many. There's plenty of guitar players who can actually play faster than Chet Atkins, can do crazy scales, crazy tapping techniques, and all these things all over the neck. But Chet wasn't concerned with showing off and being the most technically proficient guitar player. He was, but one of the things that he could do, and this kind of leads into the last factor, which is listenability. Chet never lost sight of the melody. He would play a song, he would be true to the melody, and then he would throw in little technical riffs that would keep us interested in, whoa, what did he do there? What's that little lick that he did? Just little things that would get us to think, oh wow, what was that? And then he'd kind of come back to the melody and move on. And his tone was unparalleled. I believe some of the best examples of his tone is when he was playing his Gretsch guitar. He had a Standell amp. I really believe a lot of his 70s work showcases his tune. The album Progressive Picking, for instance, is one of my absolute favorites when it comes to tone. There's a song called Hot Toddy, It might have been off his Teensville album, don't quote me on that. He also did a version with Les Paul, but his solo version has some of the most beautiful tone I've ever heard, and that's what really just made Chet Atkins click in my mind. So with those four factors, Chet established himself. He's so respected by guitar players of all shapes and sizes. He is truly one of the most influential guitar players of all time. He's one of the most pleasing to listen to. I don't think you can put out the label of greatest guitar player of all time, although we all like to do it, but he's certainly one of my favorite. I'd say actually my number one favorite guitar player. And if there's a list of top 10 most influential guitar players, I believe he deserves a spot there. So thank you for listening to this little video about one of my favorite guitar players, Chet Atkins. If you could please subscribe, it really helps. I love talking about music. I love playing a bit of it myself. And I'd highly recommend, if you're looking to get into Chet Atkins and you kind of want to discover his music, there's an album called Chet Picks on the Grammys that I had bought 15 years ago that really kind of gives a good career perspective on what he does. And his records with Tommy Emmanuel, Chet Atkins, Mark Knopfler, Les Paul, I love those duets. You can really see how he plays off other musicians, and you can always tell when he comes in, it's Chet. Chet Atkins was on a cruise one time. He decided to pick up a guitar and just kind of play off in the restaurant. Some guy came up and said, "You're good, but you're no Chet Atkins." And to me, that's a great compliment. I've got it a few times myself. So thanks again for listening. Go listen to some Chet Atkins and enjoy it. Oh, by the way, Cherokee, that song, amazing.